I think we're going to begin. Good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Adams, and I welcome you all to the 12th Annual Ministerial Meeting on the Responsibility to Protect, co-hosted by the governments of Costa Rica, Denmark, Qatar, and my own organization, the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. This year, the international community celebrates the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, as well as the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect at the 2005 UN World Summit. And while these coinciding anniversaries are to be widely celebrated, they also come at a turbulent time for humanity. So far, the 21st century has been plagued by toxic nationalism, by resurgent xenophobia. The number of people displaced by persecution, conflict, and atrocities is at its highest levels since the Second World War. Meanwhile, multilateralism and universal human rights are under attack in all too many parts of the world. We've made a lot of progress since the UN was first formed 75 years ago in the aftermath of the most devastating war in human history and in the shadow of Auschwitz. But we are living through a moment in history that underlines how far we still have to go to achieve peace and security, sustainable development, and universal respect for human rights, the three founding principles of the United Nations, and founding pillars, I should say. The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced the need for the United Nations and for solutions that embrace multilateralism, defend global norms and standards, and uphold international law. I also think it's no exaggeration to say that those to whom atrocity crimes are not just words, but real acts that pose a direct threat to them, to their families, to their communities, are looking to the United Nations to speak up for them. And that without an international community that is willing to consistently uphold its collective responsibility to protect, then there is little hope for those who are facing the threat of the machete, the death squad, or the mass grave today. However, without setting too somber a tone at the outset, I think that is why today's ministerial meeting is so timely and so important. It offers member states the unique opportunity to take stock of past efforts and best practices with regard to the prevention of atrocities and to devise effective strategies for building back better in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd also like to mention that this is the first annual R2P ministerial meeting that is open to the public, and I welcome everybody who's watching online. It will also be recorded and shared on our website after the meeting. And if you happen to be following on Twitter, you can use the hashtags, hashtag #BuildBackBetter or hashtag R2P15. Also, a quick note to the speakers, we will be communicating the speaking order via the Zoom chat function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're all Zoom experts now, I presume. It's now my great honor to announce that the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has shared a video message with us regarding the 15th anniversary of R2P, and we will now play that message.
"15 years ago at the World Summit, at a pivotal moment in our common pursuit of peace, leaders from every region unanimously adopted the responsibility to protect. Unable to prevent the horrific experiences of the previous decade, the world accepted the collective responsibility to do far more to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity and their incitement. Since this landmark step, significant progress has been made in advancing the conceptualization and operationalization of the responsibility to protect. Yet, there continues to be a gap between words of commitment and the grim reality of vulnerable populations around the world. In far too many countries, we continue to see systematic and grave human rights violations, widespread impunity, hate speech, exclusion, and discrimination. These can all increase the risk of atrocity crimes, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the risks faced by marginalized populations, including ethnic minorities, indigenous peoples, the forcibly displaced, and those affected by armed conflict. There remains an urgent need to accelerate efforts to fulfill the aspiration of the responsibility to protect and turn it into a fully fledged reality. Greater investment in prevention is critical. Building a culture of respect for human rights is equally imperative. My call to action for human rights, in which both objectives are central, can help point the way. In this century, silence in the face of human suffering should not be an option. 15 years on, let us not only reaffirm our commitment to protect populations from atrocity crimes, but live up to the unanimous call for action enshrined by the responsibility to protect.
I'm sorry about that. It's not a proper Zoom meeting unless somebody forgets to unmute themselves. But we thank the Secretary General for his comments. And I now have the tremendous honor of introducing the first of our co-hosts, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica, His Excellency, Mr. Rodolfo Solano Quiros. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning from San Jose, Costa Rica, to all my dear colleagues and friends. This is a great opportunity to share with all of you some general views from our side. 15 years ago, we all said never again to genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Since then, for Costa Rica, as well as for every member of this group, the prevention of atrocity crimes has been and continues to be a top priority. However, there is a persistent gap between our words of commitment and our collective success in ensuring the protection for vulnerable populations around the world. In this 15th anniversary of the adoption of the responsibility to protect principle, Costa Rica believes that it is imperative to continue advancing the operationalization of this norm, particularly its gender dimensions. In this regard, please allow me to underline today two aspects that are of the utmost importance for Costa Rica. First, by preventing and protecting women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence, abduction, and other crimes, we can take practical action to uphold R2P. Early warning systems should include gender-sensitive analysis and sex-disaggregated data. Moreover, without a focus on gender parity, which includes voices, perspectives, gender equality, and non-discrimination in post-conflict reconstructions, lasting peace, for which R2P strives for, remains at risk. Gender-sensitive policies are more urgent than ever. Second, discrimination and hate speech. As we all know, the Holocaust didn't start with the gas chambers, nor did Rwanda with the genocides, and Cambodia didn't start with mass killings. They start with marginalization, exclusion, discrimination, hate speech, and hate crimes. Implementing measures to address and counter hate speech and incitement is now crucial. Costa Rica called on members of this group to fully endorse and promote the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, launched by the Secretary General in June. On this anniversary, Costa Rica congratulates the global network of R2P, focal points for all its work, and respectfully suggests for states to designate representatives with senior level experience and profile to allow the network to step up its work. The global network of R2P focal points and women, peace and security networks are also instrumental in mainstream gender-based atrocity prevention at the national and regional level. Advancing our collective responsibility to protect must be a common goal that transcends geography, levels of development, and political, religious, or ideological barriers. It must become a tangible reality and reliable hope for victims of atrocity crimes. Indifference to mass atrocities, armed attacks on civilian targets, or hate crimes make us all complicit in those crimes. Let's continue working together in making prevention the heart of protection. I thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those words. And it's nice to be joining across the continents here. I now have the honor of showing a video message from another one of our co-hosts, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jasmin Al Thani.
سعادة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، أصحاب السعادة الرؤساء بالشراكة لمجموعة أصدقاء المسؤولية عن الحماية، أصحاب السعادة المندوبون الدائمون للدول الأعضاء، السيدات والسادة الموقرون، بسرور بالغ نشارك اليوم في هذا الحدث الرفيع المستوى الذي يتزامن مع إحياء المجتمع الدولي للذكرى 75 لإنشاء الأمم المتحدة، والذكرى 15 لاعتماد مبدأ المسؤولية عن الحماية في القمة العالمية لعام 2005. فكلتا المناسبتين تمثلان نقطة تحول تاريخية حيال مسؤولية المجتمع الدولي لحماية الحقوق الأساسية للإنسان وكرامته، وخلق عالم ينعم بالأمن والسلام والتنمية وحقوق الإنسان. إن من دواعي فخر دولة قطر أن يكون لها دور ريادي في هاتين المسألتين الحيويتين للمجتمع الدولي. الحضور الكرام، إن المشاركة الرفيعة المستوى في هذا الاجتماع تمثل رسالة بالغة الوضوح بأن المجتمع الدولي عاقد العزم على حماية المدنيين والتصدي بحزم للجرائم الفظيعة وإنهاء الإفلات من العقاب ومساءلة المسؤولين عن تلك الجرائم. وفي خضم التحديات غير المسبوقة التي يواجهها العالم اليوم، ولا سيما الآثار المؤلمة والكارثية لجائحة كورونا كوفيد-19 التي تهدد الجميع، ولا سيما الطبقات الاجتماعية الأكثر هشاشة، فإن مواجهة تلك التحديات ينبغي أن تكون من خلال العمل الجماعي وتقاسم الأعباء والامتثال الكامل للقانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة. ومن هنا فإن إعمال المسؤولية عن الحماية يعد خط الدفاع الأول لحماية المدنيين، لا سيما وأن هذا المبدأ أضحى من المبادئ الراسخة في القانون الدولي ويتماشى مع ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، والذي يحتاجه العالم اليوم أكثر من أي وقت مضى، نتيجة لتزايد النزاعات وطبيعتها وحجم ضحاياها من المدنيين ومسؤولية المجتمع الدولي لحمايتهم. إننا وإذ نعرب عن بالغ التقدير للجهود القيمة والمقدرة لمجموعة أصدقاء المسؤولية عن الحماية والمركز العالمي للمسؤولية عن الحماية، ونسجل ارتياحنا لإدراج هذا الموضوع بشكل رسمي في جدول أعمال الجمعية العامة التي تطلع كجهاز رئيسي في الأمم المتحدة بدور فاعل لحماية المدنيين، ويتماشى مع القرارات التي اعتمدتها لمنع وقوع الفظائع الجماعية وضمان المساءلة عن ارتكابها. وعلى الرغم من النجاحات التي تحققت في هذا الخصوص، إلا أن ما يدعو إلى القلق أن ما تحقق على المستوى القانوني الدولي لإعمال المسؤولية عن الحماية لم يساهم في منع الجرائم الفظيعة والتصدي لها بشكل كامل، حيث يزداد تواتر الجرائم الفظيعة ونطاقها في أكثر من منطقة في عالمنا ومنها منطقتنا، ويمكن أن يستمر هذا الوضع الخطير ما لم يتخذ المجتمع الدولي إجراءات أكثر تصميما واتساقا للوفاء بمسؤوليته عن حماية المدنيين. وبالنظر لأن مسألة إرساء الأمن الجماعي للبشرية مسؤولية مشتركة لجميع الدول الأعضاء، إلا أن مجلس الأمن بحكم ولايته بموجب الميثاق مسؤولية خاصة لمنع الجرائم الفظيعة والامتناع عن استخدام حق النقد في الحالات التي تنطوي على جرائم فظيعة. ونود أن نجدد دعم دولة قطر لمدونة قواعد السلوك حول الإجراءات التي يتخذها المجلس الأمن ضد الإبادة الجماعية والجرائم ضد الإنسانية وجرائم الحرب، وكذلك مبادرة تقييد استخدام حق الفيتو في مواجهة الفظائع الجماعية. وضمن نفس السياق فإن معالجة الأسباب الجذرية للأزمات وتعزيز الحوار وآليات المصالحة وتحقيق العدالة الانتقالية والالتزام باحترام حقوق الإنسان وسيادة القانون ومنع خطاب الكراهية ومكافحة التطرف وتحقيق التنمية يمكن أن يساهم في منع وقوع تلك الفظائع وحماية المدنيين. كما أن الدور الهام للتنمية المستدامة والقضاء على الفقر والمساعدات الإنمائية وبناء القدرات وترسيخ المؤسسات عوامل هامة لتحقيق مجتمعات قائمة على العدل وحكم القانون. المشاركون الموقرون، استنادا لسياسة دولة قطر والتزامها بالقانون الدولي، فإنها ساندت كافة الجهود الدولية لحماية المدنيين في الدول التي تواجه نزاعات مسلحة ووضع حد للانتهاكات الخطيرة للقانون الإنساني الدولي والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. كما قدمت بلادي كافة أشكال الدعم والإغاثة للتخفيف من معاناة المدنيين وحمايتهم، بالإضافة لعملنا الدؤوب وتعاوننا مع الشركاء على المستويين الإقليمي والدولي لإعمال المسؤولية عن الحماية، لإيماننا بأن ذلك يصب في تعزيز السلم والأمن الإقليمي والدولي. وبالنظر للدور الهام للمساعدات الإنمائية وأثرها الإيجابي في مساعدة الدول على الوفاء بمسؤولياتها عن الحماية، فقد قدمت دولة قطر الدعم الإنمائي للعديد من الدول لمساعدتها في تعزيز مؤسساتها الوطنية وخلق بيئة داخلية من شأنها تعزيز المساواة والعدالة الاجتماعية في المجتمع ودفع عملية التنمية إلى الأمام. كما عملت دولة قطر للتوصل إلى حلول سياسية للأزمات بالاستناد إلى سيادة القانون وحقوق الإنسان، ولم ندخر أي جهد لتحقيق الأهداف التي ينشدها المجتمع الدولي. وفي إطار رفع الوعي بأهمية المسؤولية عن الحماية، استضافت الدوحة في 2017 اجتماعا حول المسؤولية عن الحماية لمناقشة المساءلة كأداة للوقاية من الفظائع ودور مسؤولية الحماية في مكافحة التطرف العنيف. كما استضفنا نفس السنة 2017 الاجتماع السنوي السابع لنقاط ارتباط الشبكة العالمية للمسؤولية عن الحماية. وتماشيا مع التزام دولة قطر بالشراكة مع المجتمع الدولي لمواجهة تداعيات جائحة كورونا، فإنها قدمت مساعدات طبية لأكثر من 88 دولة، بالإضافة للدعم المقدم لمنظمة الصحة العالمية ومنظمة اليونيسيف ومفوضية الأمم المتحدة لشؤون اللاجئين. ونواصل تقديم الدعم والمساعدة وبشكل خاص للفئات الضعيفة من المدنيين لحمايتها من هذا الوباء. ختاما، فإننا اليوم أمام مسؤولية كبيرة لضمان حماية السكان المعرضين للجرائم الفظيعة، وهو ما يجعل من تنفيذ مبدأ المسؤولية عن الحماية مسألة بالغة الأهمية ولا بديل عنها. ومن جانبنا فإن دولة قطر ستواصل تعاونها مع الشركاء لحماية المدنيين وتعزيز احترام القانون الدولي وحقوق الإنسان. وأشكركم لحسن استماعكم.
I would like to thank His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qatar for that very powerful message. Now I was supposed to throw to the other co-host, who is our Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, but we are apparently having a few technical problems. We are all, of course, doing this for the first time online across different parts of the world. So instead, I'm going to now throw to a good friend, Mr. Martin Herman, the permanent representative of Denmark to the United Nations. Martin, the floor is yours.
No, thank you so much, Simon, and apologies to all that you're going to have to live with the sort of a bleak replacement for His Excellency, the Danish Foreign Minister, Jeppe Kofod, who is having technical difficulties and has asked me to transmit to you his statement. So I'll do that, and once again, forgive me. Firstly, let me thank my co-host and colleagues, Minister Quiroz and Minister Altani. Also a special thanks to the Global Center for their excellent work on this event. And I might add to all the work you put in between events to remind all of us of our responsibility, our joint responsibility to protect. And secondly, of course, to all of you out there, a warm welcome to this meeting. This year, the United Nations celebrates its 75th anniversary. 75 years ago, Auschwitz and other death camps were liberated, laying bare the most horrible lessons of what happens when we do not act together, when we do not live up to our responsibilities. The promise of the United Nations is a promise not to allow history to repeat itself. Now, I suppose this was also the motivation 15 years ago, when we all adopted the principle of responsibility to protect. A commitment not to look the other way. A commitment not to leave it to individuals to stand alone against cruelty. Now, to implement this responsibility, we must recognize that atrocity crimes do not appear out of the blue. Atrocity crimes begin with what might seem like minor human rights violations. And let me use this opportunity to stress that I fully support the Secretary General's call to action on human rights. A culture of respect for human rights is imperative. Now, the legacy of our shortcomings in Myanmar and Sri Lanka leaves no doubt, and unfortunately there are more examples. The responsibility rests with states, but the United Nations can and should make a big difference. But at the moment, we are witnessing a divided Security Council. And in this vacuum, the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council have important roles in preventing and responding to atrocity crime. The establishment of accountability mechanisms for Syria and Myanmar are excellent examples. As member of the Human Rights Council, Denmark works tirelessly to put prevention on the agenda. And we welcome this summer's adoption of a resolution in the Council on the responsibility to protect. As states, we should also accept that prevention starts at home. We must all do our utmost to mitigate risk. Hate speech and xenophobia, for instance, can happen everywhere, but should be tolerated nowhere. COVID-19 has increased tensions globally, and this event allows us to discuss how we can link recovery measures to prevention of the most horrible crimes. COVID-19 is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. And if we join forces and truly build back better and greener, we will create resilience. Not only against future pandemics, but also against the societal structures that lead to hate speech and incitement to violence. This will require all states to keep values and human rights at the very forefront of security as well as development policy. Sadly, the number of people in the world displaced by persecution, conflict, and atrocity is at its highest since the Second World War. And with the effect of COVID-19, that number is likely to increase. There has never been a better time to focus on a shared responsibility. So we must act. We all share the responsibility to protect. I look forward to a good meeting and to continue this important work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you to the Ambassador for that comment. And I'd now like to open the floor to statements from other member states. And I'm going to go first of all to another old friend, His Excellency, Mr. Zohrab Imnatsakyan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, dear Simon. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, warm greetings from Yerevan, from Armenia, and I'd want to start with expressing my and our deep appreciation to the co-hosts, Denmark, Costa Rica, and Qatar, for this initiative of gathering the 12th Ministerial, though virtually, and particular appreciation and gratitude to an old friend, good friend, and a relentless activist in promoting the prevention agenda globally, Dr. Simon Adams. Thank you so much. 15 years ago, we, all together, the UN member states, endorsed the responsibility to protect as a firm political commitment to protect populations from massive and atrocious crimes, including the crime of genocide. The responsibility to protect is both a political and a moral commitment. Together with the legal obligations deriving from the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, it is a significant tool of prevention. As a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Armenia enlisted among its priorities the contribution to global efforts to prevent genocide and strengthening the United Nations Office on Genocide Prevention and the Responsibility to Protect. Sustained and effective functioning of the office remains a compelling priority today. In 2015, Armenia led the global efforts to designate 9th December as the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and the Prevention of this crime. By this, we have provided together collectively an additional platform to develop and invest in our collective efforts for the prevention agenda. We have been consistently outlining the importance of strengthening capacities at both national, regional, and international levels to detect and act on warning signs which may lead to massive crimes, and the necessity to prevent genocide and other mass atrocities at early stages. All genocides could have been prevented, whether it is the Armenian genocide, the Jewish Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, or other atrocity crimes. Dissemination of hatred, intolerance, radicalism, war propaganda, incitement to and actual discrimination against racial, national, ethnic, religious, and all other minorities, as well as the targeted attacks against civilians, continue to shape present realities in different parts of the world. The international community, the United Nations and its member states are still ill-prepared to respond in a timely and decisive manner to these signals of trouble. It is a matter of serious concern that the international community may afford inaction to the language of threats, wherein denial and justification of past genocides, laced with aggressive and abusive vocabulary of certain political leaders about lessons that victims across generations should not forget, is most disturbing. Future perpetrators interpret silence to such barbaric disregard of the norms of a civilized world as a license to kill. Under no circumstances, sovereignty can be a safe haven for perpetrating gross and grave human rights violations against those who are peacefully exercising their human rights, including the right of self-determination. No nation can be afforded the right to kill behind the thick curtain of sovereignty. The responsibility to protect is critical in this regard, as it reminds that sovereignty is not a license for impunity, but a responsibility. Sovereignty should be exactly the primary and most functional level for the effective implementation of the responsibility to protect. International cooperation to strengthen national capacities to protect remain as important as ever. Respect for human rights is an integral part of a democratic society. It is important to implement human rights obligations and commitments and to cooperate closely with the United Nations human rights mechanisms. In this context, it is also important to stress the role of the civil society in advocacy, early warning, training, and education. And once again, I want to emphasize the important role that the Global Center has been playing, continuously playing in this regard. Such priorities were underlined in the resolution on the prevention of genocide presented by Armenia and unanimously adopted by the Human Rights Council in June 2020. Since 2015 now, Armenia has been regularly hosting global forums against the crime of genocide, gathering prominent scholars and practitioners of genocide prevention from across the globe. This is our unwavering commitment and contribution to building a global community against the crime of genocide and other mass atrocities. The upcoming 4th Global Forum will be dedicated to the theme of women and girls challenging the victim paradigm, and will address the root causes and consequences of the genocidal violence against women and girls. The conference will pay attention to the necessity of preventing sexual and gender-based violence and prosecuting offenders. Dear friends, the prevention of mass atrocity crimes is a responsibility that falls to all of us, and we will continue our efforts to actively contribute to advancing the global prevention agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those very poignant and also very generous comments. It's now my great honor to call on His Excellency Mr. Jean Hasselborn, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Luxembourg.
Thank you, dear Simon. Thank you, friends. My thanks go to Costa Rica, to Denmark, Qatar, and the Global Center for the responsibility to protect. First, let me say that we highly value the work done by the Global Center, by civil society and academia, and of course, the special advisor of the UN Secretary General on the responsibility to protect, Dr. Karen Smith. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed us to come together around a common purpose. Many of us have cooperated to save lives. Many of us supported the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire. But at the same time, the pandemic has created new challenges. It has been used as a cover for political repression. Authoritarians have wasted no time in exploiting the pandemic and as an opportunity to crack down on dissident, civic space, and human rights. The risk of mass atrocities is increasing. In Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, in South Sudan, the DRC, the Sahel region, we see gross violations of international humanitarian law. Civilians, especially women and children, suffer disproportionately. The Rohingya in Myanmar, the Yazidi in Iraq and in Syria, and also the Uyghur in China are victims of ongoing genocidal campaigns. In many cases, early warning mechanisms have worked. Civil society, UN human rights mechanisms, and the independent media have sounded the alarm. But most of the time, unfortunately, early action to prevent mass atrocity crimes has not followed. Action by the UN Security Council has been either too little, too late, or has been blocked altogether. We need to keep pushing for a more determined action by the Security Council to prevent mass atrocity crimes, using, for example, the ACT Code of Conduct. We are also supportive of the idea to invite Security Council members using their veto to explain their vote before the UN General Assembly. We also need to keep R2P firmly on the agenda of the General Assembly. Let me conclude by underlining the need to support the fight against impunity, and in particular, the need to support the work of the International Criminal Court. Fighting impunity for the crimes that have been committed is crucial if we want to prevent further crimes from happening. I thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister, for your statement. Again, I just ask for people's indulgence. We are dealing with internet issues on a lot of different continents and a lot of different time zones here. I'm now told that I need to go to Morocco. So Morocco, the esteemed representative of Morocco, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the floor. Allow me at the outset to thank their Excellencies Sheikh Mohammed bin Jassim Al Thani, Rodolfo Solano Quiros, and Jeb Kofod for convening this important meeting in this critical juncture. My special thanks go also to Dr. Simon Adams for his tireless effort to promote the agenda for R2P. My minister asked me to express to you his apologies as he could not attend our meeting today due to an urgent and unforeseen official commitment. He asked me to reaffirm to you the commitment of Morocco to the responsibility to protect agenda and to pass on to you his best wishes of success for this conference. My minister kindly requests that his statement be circulated to the distinguished delegation. I thank you very much.
I thank very much the representative of Morocco, and please send your minister our best wishes, and we do understand that these things happen. It is now my tremendous pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States.
Thank you very much. Times of crisis are very convenient for the abuse of power. Dictators find a ready-made excuse to roll back the rights of citizens. The pandemic has also increased the focus of our countries on events within their borders. The meaning of this cannot be to turn inward, to forget our responsibilities as members of the international community and ignore the events taking place outside our borders. As individuals, as states, as institutions, we have a responsibility to speak up and denounce those who are using this crisis to increase authoritarian practices to consolidate their hold on power. At the same time, we must be willing and able to support those who are simply trying to keep their population safe. The September 16th report of the United Nations Fact-Finding Mission finds reasonable grounds to believe the crimes against humanity were committed in Venezuela. Atrocities are taking place in Venezuela, and the regime of Nicolás Maduro is failing in its responsibility to protect its population. This report validates the work conducted by the OES panel of independent experts that was published more than 2 years ago that concluded that crimes against humanity were taking place in Venezuela. While these efforts serve as important milestones in the pursuit of justice for the people of Venezuela, in the interim, insufficient action has been taken and they have fallen short in preventing an escalation in abuses and atrocities. We have not been able to protect the Venezuelans. We have not been able to protect the thousands and thousands of those that were extrajudicially executed. Thousands of political prisoners, thousands of tortured people. We have seen attempts to appease the dictatorship, and that can only made it worse. The regime of Venezuela has used the pandemic as a mask for further crackdowns, even as it carries out sham elections. Preventative action comes with a political cost, and it is easier to stand by and hope for a different outcome. And so we keep learning that those who are willing to stop at nothing for unchallenged power and wealth will in fact do anything to hold onto the power. As we seek to build back better, we must build programs and partnerships that strengthen the economic and social development of our societies and improve the capacity of governments to respond to the needs of the people, helping to avoid the worst outcomes. As moves through the pandemic, the true measure of our society will lie in our ability to protect the civil liberties and freedoms at the heart of our democracies, while ensuring the public health and safety of our people. Central to that role is our work to ensure that further abuses and atrocities do not take place nowhere in the world, not in this hemisphere. To this end, and given the challenges in the Western Hemisphere, I'm looking forward to hosting the next meeting of the global network of R2P focal points as soon as it is safe to do so. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his comments there and for all the work he does across the region in terms of upholding the responsibility to protect. It is now my tremendous honor to call on His Excellency Dr. Lemogang Kwape, the Minister of International Affairs and Cooperation of Botswana.
Thank you very much, Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by appreciating the chairs for co-hosting this 12th annual ministerial meeting on the responsibility to protect. It is indeed timely to deliberate on how we can together advance the principle of the responsibility to protect population from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Even though the notion was adopted only 15 years ago, it is the embodiment of the ideals on which United Nations was founded. It is thus befitting that as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the UN and introspect on the progress made, we should recommit to doing all to ensure never again shall humankind suffer the scourge of war. Protection of civilian population is our individual responsibility as states and collective responsibility as the international community. Co-chairs, the theme for this meeting, Building Back Better, Strengthening the UN, Preventing Atrocities, and Uphold Human Rights, could not be more apt as the entire globe continues to endure the daunting challenge brought in by the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. We note that in dealing with this coronavirus pandemic, cases of gross human rights violation, especially on the most vulnerable, have been recorded in some parts of the world. In that regard, we support the United Nations Secretary General for a global ceasefire. If ever there was a right time, it is now. These values resonate well with the ideals of the responsibility to protect, as they both have the ultimate goal of protecting humanity from the abuse of their inherent rights. Co-chairs, it is also saddening to note that 15 years after the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect, we are still witnessing pockets of violent conflicts in different parts of the world. In some of these areas, cross-violation of human rights and crimes against humanity are increasingly perpetuated on many innocent people. Co-chairs, we all agree that the collective promotion of peace and security, as well as the development, remain fundamental for the protection of population around the world. In that regard, Botswana recently assumed the chairship of the Southern African Development Community organ on politics, defense, and security cooperation. This committee has the responsibility of driving peace-building initiatives and consolidating democracy towards peace and stability in the SADC region. This is particularly important for any population at risk, as identified by the R2P atrocity prevention lens. We will thus work within the regional body, and by extension through the United Nations Security Council in pursuit of this objective. Co-chairs, while we recognize the primary guarantor of basic human rights of a people lies with the state, given the right-seeing complexity of where atrocities occur, there is a compelling need to focus on the second pillar of the responsibility to protect, which emphasizes that states must be capacitated to enable them to take on their individual responsibilities. It is therefore imperative that where states manifestly fail to protect their populations, the international community duly assumes that responsibility. Co-chairs, it is our earnest belief that as we mark the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect, we can take a comprehensive look at our individual collective efforts to implement this noble idea. This should include actively reflecting on its inclusion on the formal agenda of the General Assembly as a way of enhancing deeper collective engagement on the issue by the international community. Chair, let me conclude my remarks by reaffirming Botswana's strong support for the principle of the responsibility to protect and our resolve to work with others to advance it. With those few remarks, I thank you for your attention.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that very powerful message all the way there from Gaborone. And it is now my tremendous pleasure to hand over to His Excellency, Mr. Mario Juvenal Lopez Chavarri, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Peru.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams. Good morning, ministers and vice ministers. Good morning, friends. I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark for their kind invitation to participate in this meeting on the responsibility to protect, R2P. While reaffirming our commitment to R2P, Peru recognizes that it resides primarily with the state and that the international community also has the responsibility to use peaceful means under Chapter 6 and 7 of the United Nations Charter to help protect the most vulnerable populations. As a country committed to international humanitarian law and international human rights law, Peru is a party to every fundamental instrument on both matters. Such instruments are duly implemented in our domestic legal order. During our last participation as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, Peru strove to generate consensus amongst members of the Council to promote the responsibility to protect civilian populations in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Peru has promoted, along with a group of other countries, the resolution entitled 15th anniversary of the responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, as ensuring in the 2005 World Summit outcome. And its 44th session, the Council decided to convene before its 47th session an intersessional panel discussion on the exchange of best practices on strengthening national policies and strategies to implement the R2P principle. Prevention is the most effective means of protection. Therefore, it is important to highlight every effort to improve early warning systems and to achieve a rapid transition to early action, as mentioned in the Secretary General's report. This concept implies full respect for the rule of law and the international and national levels. Beyond existing prevention capabilities, effective accountability mechanisms must be promoted. In this regard, it is equally essential to ensure accountability for the commission of mass atrocities. The International Criminal Court has a fundamental role to play. We encourage all states to adhere to the Rome Statute and to cooperate with the court, especially in the current circumstance when such cooperation and political support is most needed. However, many challenges lie ahead. Prevention measures that take gender issues into account should also be established. As the Secretary General highlighted in his latest report, states must make greater efforts to protect their populations and promote a culture of tolerance and respect for human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. It is now my great pleasure to call on His Excellency, Mr. Piotr Wawrzyk, the Secretary of State for Legal and Treaty Affairs, the United Nations Consular and Parliamentary Affairs. The floor is now yours, Your Excellency.
Distinguished Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin with thanking the organizers for convening this important meeting, marking 50th anniversary of the responsibility to protect concept. Building on the heritage of the Polish lawyer Rafał Lemkin, who conceived the notion of genocide. Poland stands firm on the principle of responsibility to protect. We support all actions aimed at preventing atrocities, protecting civilians, and holding the perpetrators accountable. Implementation of the concept of responsibility to protect cannot be done without building the culture of prevention. In this context, Poland supports early warning mechanisms both at national and international level. It is necessary to foster risk assessment capacities within various UN bodies. To reduce the risk of atrocities, we need stable state institutions, good governance, sustainable development, as well as legal frameworks that protect and promote human rights. Let me stress also a link between the concept of responsibility to protect and the women, peace and security agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, UN human rights system should play an important role in addressing the risk of atrocities. As a current member of the Human Rights Council, Poland supports the use of human rights fora to advance the concept of responsibility to protect. We'll also continue to advocate for respect for the international law, including international humanitarian law. It is of fundamental importance for effective prevention of atrocities. The knowledge and education leading to high advances are another necessary basis in that regard. As the UN marks its 75th anniversary, we should use this moment to ensure that never again would any person face the horror of genocide and other atrocity crimes. This will only be possible if we embrace multilateralism and join our efforts to foster prevention of atrocities and uphold justice. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement, and it is now my honor to call on His Excellency Mr. Francisco Bustillo, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uruguay.
At the outset, allow me to extend my congratulations and recognition to the governments of Costa Rica, Denmark, and Qatar, along with the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for convening this ministerial meeting. The reality of our time shows us a world that is stirred by atrocity crimes, where daily violence against millions of civilians is perpetrated by both armed groups and states, in flagrant violation of the norms of international humanitarian law and human rights law. The COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating this already dire scenario, and it is deepening exciting inequalities, with devastating consequences, particularly for vulnerable populations living in fragile contexts of armed conflict. Even this worrisome international environment, the responsibility to protect acquires a new relevant dimension. The international community must devise effective strategies for building back better after the pandemic to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. I would like to highlight 4 aspects that should be taken into consideration. Firstly, the effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is paramount to build strong societies that are resilient to mass atrocity crimes. Building back better demands eradicating poverty, promoting development, as well as strengthening democratic institutions, human rights protection, and the rule of law in line with this agenda. Education plays a fundamental role in reducing poverty and inequality. SDG 4 affirms that every child has the right to equal education. Through the transformative power of education, young generations will acquire knowledge, economic and social security, and better opportunities in life. Moreover, they will learn the principles of tolerance and coexistence that are necessary to build healthy and peaceful societies in which the fundamental values of human dignity are considered and respected. In second place, the strategy to be developed should take into consideration a gender perspective of the responsibility to protect. The implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda can contribute to combat mass atrocity crimes. Women need to be protected from these grave human rights violations, which include rape and other forms of sexual violence. But they should not be viewed exclusively as victims. Women are also positive agents of change, and as such, they should participate in the adoption of measures to prevent and halt mass atrocities. Thirdly, perpetrators must be held accountable and face justice. Accountability is essential to ensure that these crimes, which violate the fundamental standards of humanity, are not repeated. States have the primary responsibility to enforce the respect of human rights of their people, must guarantee accountability within their borders. Crimes of this magnitude should not go unpunished, and when domestic justice fails to be applied, it is necessary to resort to international justice. Uruguay is a strong supporter of the International Criminal Court and advocates for the referral of cases to the Court of the Security Council when appropriate. Fourthly, the Security Council has a primary responsibility to prevent genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. In this regard, my country supports the initiatives that promote the voluntary abstention of the permanent members to veto resolutions when mass atrocities are perpetrated. Uruguay is also committed to the cooperation at the maximum extent with the Security Council for the proper functioning of peacekeeping operations, which have proved to be useful in protecting populations from mass atrocities. The Uruguayan government provides training to its troops before deployment on issues related to protection and detection of early warning indicators of these crimes. We encourage the United States to improve the United Nations peacekeepers' capabilities to accomplish the protection mandates at the prevention of atrocity crimes. To conclude, in this year when we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the responsibility to protect and the 75th anniversary of United Nations, Uruguay would like to reaffirm its commitment to the responsibility to protect and advocate for continuing to defend the consensus to advance in its due implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for your comments. They are much appreciated. And I now call on Her Excellency, Ms. Emanuela Del Rey, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I really wish to thank all the conveners for this important meeting. Dear friends, the celebration of the 15th anniversary of the Responsibility to Protect principle offers us an excellent opportunity to provide momentum to the advancement and the operationalization of the Responsibility to Protect agenda. The revolutionary passage from the concept of responsibility to intervene to the concept of protection within the wider framework of a collective responsibility towards vulnerable people has already brought substantial results. Yet there are still various challenges to face, especially in this complex historical moment. We need to reflect on the aim of R2P and on its strategies, while responding to the political challenge of raising a true global awareness and focus on preparedness with the right structures and procedures based on what should become a natural sense of resolution for all. These are challenging times, as I said, for the protection of civilians. We continue to register widespread violations of human rights and of the international humanitarian law. Personally, I believe that the preservation of universal human rights will be the real challenge of this century. Besides, today, the COVID-19 outbreak has aggravated the suffering of people living in conflict zones. The restrictive measures states adopted to prevent the spread of the pandemic negatively impacted humanitarian logistics and exacerbated socioeconomic hardship, which in turn is amongst the primary triggers of atrocious crimes. No doubt that advancing R2P principles is key to address the roots of such crimes. The commitment of member states to the responsibility to protect is first and foremost a commitment to prevent and mitigate the risk of these horrific crimes from occurring. Atrocity can and must be prevented. It is in this view that we value and promote a cross-cutting strategy linking the different UN agendas, from the protection of civilians to women's peace and security, from the sustainable development to the broader human rights agenda. Out of the many issues that we would cover, let me point out this one for the moment. Preparedness and prevention, which are absolutely the solution. Strengthening the tools for early warning, both at the UN and state level, is crucial for effective prevention. It is essential to develop and improve our methodology to detect early signals of potential disruption. The perpetration of atrocities often comes after signals and warnings, given that they are well planned and executed deliberately. The collaboration of all is also key. Local actors could play a key role in atrocity prevention. We need to strengthen civil society and help women in building pluralistic and inclusive societies, providing the best safety net shielding from mass atrocities. Italy is a staunch supporter and advocate of R2P. This is also demonstrated by our financial support to the Office for the Prevention of Genocide and the Responsibility to Protect. Be reassured that you can count on Italy. You can count on our long-standing and relentless effort in support of the principles and actions of the responsibility to protect. Thank you.
Molto grazie, Minister. And of course, we have people in a number of different time zones around the world who were not able to participate in person. So we are now going to play a video from the Honourable Ms. Marise Payne, who is the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister for Women from Australia.
The global pandemic has impacted our world profoundly, and the disruption will continue into the future. We are seeing peace building, development, and gender equality gains jeopardised, economic challenges exacerbated, and social tensions increased. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, from the ashes of which we created a new international order, governed by rules and with peace and security, human rights and development at its heart. This year we also mark the 15th anniversary of the adoption, by consensus, of the principle of the responsibility to protect. As we confront the highest number of displaced people ever recorded, as well as complex conflicts involving violent non-state actors and the COVID-19 pandemic, R2P remains a critical tool to guide the UN system. The COVID-19 pandemic poses great and immediate risks to health and life, but secondary impacts can also significantly heighten the risk of mass atrocity crimes. These impacts include increasing levels of tension between groups expressed through racism, hate speech, stigmatisation, incitement to violence, sexual and gender-based violence, and other human rights violations and abuses. The international community must respond to this pandemic in practical ways that help us recover from the virus, but which also reinforce universal human rights, encourage human solidarity and uphold our responsibility to protect vulnerable populations. Australia supports the UN Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire. His appeal to place human rights at the heart of the COVID-19 response and recovery, and his further strong call to end the escalation of violence against women and girls. Managing the health, economic, social and security ramifications of the pandemic is a highly complex challenge. We must not let the pandemic nor our responses to it undermine human rights, gender equality, development or peace-building gains. This is an opportunity to build back better, including by taking forward UN reforms. The success of UN reforms particularly implementation of the Sustaining Peace Agenda, are not only vital to fighting the pandemic, but to creating resilience in its turbulent wake.
We thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Women from Australia for that message. And I've been told to speak slowly as they queue up the next video, but we're about to go to His Excellency Mr. Shahriar Alam, the Honourable State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh.
Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizer for hosting this ministerial meeting on the responsibility to protect R2P. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the UN and the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect. 2020 is also an important year for Bangladesh when we celebrate the birth centenary of the founding father of our nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the greatest Bengali of all time. Throughout his life, Bangabandhu fought against oppression and injustice and worked for protecting the human rights of his people. On this occasion, Bangladesh reiterates its commitment to R2P. We believe that multilateralism is the most effective tool for implementing the principle of R2P, with the UN playing the central role. Excellencies, the pandemic COVID-19 has affected all aspects of our life and jeopardized our economic and social achievements. The pandemic, among others, has generated many social ills. In the words of Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the pandemic continues to unleash a tsunami of hate and xenophobia, scapegoating, and scaremongering. States must guard against the fallouts of the pandemic, including disparities, intolerance, and racial hatred, and protect migrants, minorities, and other vulnerable groups. We have seen how hatred and intolerance can lead to mass atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. This is what happened in Rwanda in 1994 and Srebrenica in 1995. In Myanmar, mass atrocities and systematic violation of human rights also forced nearly 1 million Rohingyas to flee Myanmar in 2017. When these persecuted, tortured, and traumatized Myanmar nationals gathered across our border, Bangladesh acted responsibly. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the mother of humanity, decided to open our border to protect these people and shelter them temporarily. But even after 3 years, not a single Rohingya could return home due to a lack of political will and conducive environment in Myanmar. Sadly, instead of creating conditions favorable for repatriation, more violence is being pursued against the Rohingyas in the Rakhine state, defying the obligation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2532. Myanmar kept Rakhine state outside the scope of the ceasefire. The fact-finding mission of UN already alerted that the remaining 600,000 Rohingyas are at risk of genocide. Compelling evidence has resulted in the issuance of provisional orders from the International Court of Justice, yet Myanmar has not done anything to change its course. The international community must bring pressure to bear on Myanmar to stop the atrocities and create a conducive environment so that the Rohingya can return home. Let us not sit idle and watch the unfolding of another episode of atrocities with genocidal intent. Excellencies, we are going through an unsettling time. The COVID-19 has laid bare the hollowness of our traditional concepts of development. Inclusive, people-centric development with full respect to human rights and equality has become imperative. Now that we have an opportunity to build back better, we need to refocus our priorities with the international community working in full solidarity. Multilateralism is not an option to face the challenges of the pandemic, but a necessity. Since its birth, Bangladesh has placed the highest trust and confidence in the power of multilateralism. Bangladesh will continue to support the UN pivotal role in preventing atrocities, protecting human rights, and sustaining peace. Thank you.
We thank the minister from Bangladesh for that message. And Bangladesh has been such an outstanding partner in the battle against impunity for the genocide against the Rohingya. We're now going to throw to a video from His Excellency Mr. Tomas Petricek, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, responsibility to protect their populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity stands at the core of the social contract giving the state its raison d'etre. At the World Summit in 2005, we all stood united and subscribed to the universal responsibility. The three pillars of R2P were born. Back then, we reacted to the dire situation in various countries with ongoing domestic conflicts, whose communities were affected by the mass atrocities perpetrated all too often by their own state officials. We have to admit that 15 years on, R2P remains a mere theoretical concept for far too many people around the world. Yet, while most of our efforts in development and humanitarian assistance or conflict prevention have R2P values at its core, they often lack the label. International community should deploy all means available, such as early warning mechanism, mediation or sanctions, to prevent conflicts and preclude any atrocities committed against civilians. A special emphasis must be given to the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, political participation and accountability. The protection of vulnerable populations is now more pressing than ever with the COVID-19 pandemic leading to deepening of inequalities. The Czech Republic cooperates with other EU member states with all relevant UN bodies, including the Special Advisor on the responsibility to protect, as well as civil society actors to assist others to uphold their obligations under international human rights, humanitarian and refugee law. Responsibility to protect is our shared responsibility. Ensuring accountability for mass atrocity crimes is one of the best ways to prevent their recurrence. Where national mechanisms fail, it is up to the international community to step in. We support the International Criminal Court, which remains the most important institution to fight impunity for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Let me conclude by assuring you that the Czech Republic, a proud member of the group of friends of R2P, stands ready to explore all possible ways to implement R2P more effectively and with concrete results for civilians around the world. Thank you.
We thank the Minister of the Czech Republic for that wonderful video. We are now going back live with some speakers now, and it is my tremendous honor to call on Her Excellency Ms. Cristina Gayach, the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Iberian America and the Caribbean of Spain. Deputy Minister, if you're there.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much, Simon. Thanks very much to all the colleagues who had been speaking before me for the interesting remarks. It is a pleasure to join you and to have the opportunity to discuss a vital issue that is at the core of the UN values. 2020 marks the year of several anniversaries around the prevention of atrocities and genocide, including the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the responsibility to protect. With this in mind, I would like to seize this opportunity to reflect on the current state of R2P. There is a moral imperative for the prevention of atrocity crimes that underpins the R2P concept itself. If we want to uphold this concept, and Spain believes so, we must address three priorities according to our mind. The first one is to strengthen the gender-based approach in everything that is connected to R2P, such the prevention of crimes, peacekeeping operations, and transitional processes. UN data shows that the more we involve women, the better chances we have to establish peace and to maintain it. We need to strengthen early warning systems, providing them with the gender-based analysis systems and sex disaggregated data. Gender-based approach is not an accessory. It is a core element of any sustainable prevention, peacekeeping, and peace-building processes. The second priority is to strengthen the International Criminal Court. The ICC's sole purpose is to fight against impunity, significantly against the most heinous crimes, such as crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, and aggression. We cannot tolerate any attacks against the court, and we must respect its impartial efforts to uphold the rule of law in a rules-based international order. The next prosecutor must be aware of the necessity to both work tirelessly and to deliver significant results. Many atrocities are still being perpetrated all over the world, and the ICC, although being a complementary institution to the responsibility of states to prosecute these crimes, leads a prominent role in this matter. The third priority, to our mind, is the reform of the Security Council. The effective prevention and action against atrocity crimes call for reform of the Security Council and its working methods. We need to reinforce the Security Council with more democracy, more transparency, stronger legitimacy, increased accountability, and fairer representation across the regional groups. This reform should include the elimination of the permanent members' privileged veto power, or at the very least, it must be properly reformed to allow for the effective prevention and swift action against atrocity crimes. The Security Council has the responsibility to maintain and establish peace. Geopolitical differences cannot be an excuse not to do so. We cannot afford another Birkenau or Srebrenica. We have the means to fight against impunity and to make the work safer space for children, women, minorities, and victims of conflict. Let us keep working towards these goals. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us together on this plea for stronger R2P.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that outstanding message. I truly appreciate it. As a member of the Irish diaspora, it's now my honor to say that we're going to play a video from His Excellency, Mr. Colin Brophy, the Minister for Overseas Development Aid and the Diaspora of the Republic of Ireland.
My thanks to Costa Rica, Denmark and Qatar for organising today's urgent and important event. As it's the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the R2P concept, there are many populations around the world experiencing potential atrocity crimes. The current pandemic has increased the vulnerability of such peoples as deterioration in governance structures, in economic circumstances and social cohesion all serve to undermine the structures and safeguards that help us prevent such abuses. Those of us committed to R2P must continue to highlight the need for preventative action and to look at how collectively we can increase atrocity prevention capacity within those countries at risk within the UN system. To this end, Ireland is very pleased to work with the Auschwitz Institute for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities. on the development and delivery of training and the prevention of conflict-related atrocity crimes. This training will enhance the skills of the security sector personnel in recognising early warning signs, allowing them to prevent conflict-related atrocities. When considering prevention, we must continue to ensure that humanitarian rights and the UN's commitment to them is fully visible in all. We must continue to provide full support to international human rights bodies and monitoring mechanisms. These form an integral part of the existing early warning system for potential threats of atrocity crimes. We are hopeful that the Secretary-General Guterres will soon select a new Special Advisor for Prevention and Genocide. I want to take this opportunity to thank Adama Dieng for all his work during his 8 years in the role. Significant efforts have been made across the UN system to ensure coordination and coherence so that all development humanitarian, human rights and peace and security actors work towards the same goal of sustainable peace and development. That coordination and coherence is just as relevant to the development of R2P. COVID-19 reminds us of how interconnected and interdependent we all are. When we understand that we are interconnected, the next logical steps are recognizing our responsibilities and acting on them, looking to how we protect our people, protect each other, and protect all rights. Our focus now must be on the prevention of atrocity crimes. We know the early warning signs. We have a responsibility to rebuild those safeguards that help prevent such abuses. The international community has learned much from past horrors, past mistakes. We must now put that terrible knowledge to good use.
We, of course, thank the Republic of Ireland for that wonderful video from their minister, and I echo their comments of support for Adama Dieng, who of course retired after so many years of service to the UN recently. A great friend of all of us who work in this area. We are now going to go to a video from His Excellency Mr. Linas Linkevičius, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. I promise we'll, here we go. We seem to be having a problem with the sound. We seem to be having a little problem with this, with the sound there on that particular video. I think we're just going to give it a second so that they can try to reboot the video. But in the meantime, I just want to say again that it's so great to have this 12th meeting, ministerial meeting. It's been the very first one we've ever had to do. Here we go. Yeah, we seem to be having some technical difficulties there. Just give me 1 second, if you could. We're going to try a video instead from, we'll get back to Lithuania. We'll figure out what's going wrong there. In the meantime, we're now going to watch a video from Her Excellency Mrs. Amin Zapravrova, the Deputy First Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Distinguished participants, let me express gratitude to the organizers of this event as we celebrate 75th anniversary of the United Nations and citizen and a Crimean Tatar whose native soil has been illegally occupied and turned into a place of persecution and a military base. I would like to reaffirm my government's commitment to the R2P principles. It is of paramount importance that the General Assembly has frank and open deliberations on preventive action. My country was among those who initiated the first ever inclusion of this item in the agenda of the General Assembly 3 years ago and continues to supporting it. It speaks volumes that a group of states which made the same commitments 15 years ago now tries to oppose such a discussion. For the Russian Federation, the reason is plain to see. The Kremlin fails to distort the sense of R2P concept and to use its provisions for justifying flagrant violations of international law. Only those states which lack democracy and rule of law are the source of aggression, gross human rights violations, and atrocity crimes. Such states do not want to see their illegitimate actions under scrutiny by the UN membership, because R2P principles totally exclude use of military force under pretext of protection of population from imagined threats with the real annexation purposes. Russia's supplies of weapons and ammunition to its armed formation in occupied Donbass threaten lives of the civilian population. This is a crime under R2P. The Russian occupation regime in Crimea and Donbass continues to deny access for international human rights observers, including the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. Human rights and humanitarian presence in the occupied territories are critical parts of a prevention mechanism. In addition to monitoring, it can also identify risks for sharp deterioration of the situation and make respective recommendations for early action. It is of utmost importance to reach the widest possible agreement on R2P principles after thorough consideration in the General Assembly. Ukraine is ready to contribute to this end. Thank you.
We thank Ukraine for that wonderful statement there. And just to update people, we will try to go back to Lithuania, but it's apparently a Zoom issue, and our staff are working on that now. In the meantime, we're going to see another video from His Excellency Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, Minister of State, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
I would like to thank the organisers and hosts of today's meeting, the Global Centre for Responsibility to Protect, and of course the governments of Costa Rica, Denmark and Qatar for asking me to speak to you today. Despite the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire, armed attacks sadly continue on some of the world's most vulnerable civilians. When we cast an eye around the world, places such as Myanmar, following decades-long pattern of violations by the military against minorities, the international community sadly has been unable to stop systematic and brutal attacks on the Rohingya community, which has culminated in the exodus of over 700,000 Rohingyas in 2017 alone. The risk of further atrocities in Myanmar remains, and the United Kingdom is committed to working hard with partners and indeed experts to ensure that we are better equipped to respond to these challenges in the future. The United Kingdom's recently published Protection of Civilians paper restates the importance of political engagement, respect for international humanitarian law in military operations, and a renewed commitment to R2P. Women and girls must also be at the centre of our efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts. That remains a priority. On the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, we, the United Kingdom, will be promoting the meaningful participation and pivotal leadership of women in all aspects of peace and security. It is absolutely imperative that we protect them from reprisals and threats for conducting this courageous and incredibly vital and important work. UK legislation also protects free speech. However, freedom is never an excuse to cause harm or indeed spread hatred. And that is why we launched our Hate Crime Action Plan in 2016 and refreshed it in 2018. We will continue to work with our international partners to build on the plan's key achievements. And to those who commit or direct others to commit atrocities, I say this to you: you will be held to account. I'm very proud of the United Kingdom's new global human rights sanctions regime, a mechanism we will use to deter human rights violations and abuses around the world and to punish the wicked. They will be held to account. The UK will not stand idly by when people are being oppressed or hurt. None of us must do so. Thank you very much.
We thank Lord Ahmed and the United Kingdom for that statement. Colleagues, friends, we're going to try Lithuania again, and we're going to see if we can get the audio to work through Zoom this time.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Global Center for Responsibility to Protect, governments of Denmark, Costa Rica, and Qatar for organizing this event. 15 years ago, the responsibility to protect has been recognized by international community as important political commitment to anticipate, prevent, and respond to genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Undeniable progress has been made in those 15 years. Unfortunately, it was repeatedly tested, as we witnessed in Syria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Myanmar, or Yemen. What must be done in order to ensure that the concept of responsibility to protect remains intact? First, protection of human rights is imperative. Furthermore, systematic human rights violations most of the time are important warning signs of potential crisis. Therefore, independent and free media, as well as civil society, could contribute to early warning as well as early action by increasing public awareness about ongoing human rights violations. Second, justice and accountability must be ensured. If left unaddressed, it can lead to the resurgence of violence, bringing more human rights violations and crimes against humanity. In this regard, the active role of UN Security Council is necessary. It must refrain from blocking decisions aimed at preventing or ending genocide, crimes against humanity, or mass atrocities by using its privilege of veto. Third, no crisis, no matter how big it is, cannot be a reason to commit mass atrocity crimes. It's essential that the entire international community responds to COVID-19 pandemic in ways that defend universal human rights, emphasize human solidarity, and uphold our responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from atrocities. We should not let the perpetrators take advantage of this situation. Excellencies, history shows that even minor violations of human rights could become conflicts that lead to mass atrocities or crimes against humanity. In this context, I'd like to refer to the ongoing events in Belarus, where current authorities are determined to suppress all forms of dissent and free expression of the people of Belarus, including through mass violence. Disproportionate attacks against demonstrators, arbitrary arrests and prosecutions, enforced disappearances, torture, and other ill treatment of peaceful protesters demand a strong international response. The national community must act so that we do not need to regret that we turned a blind eye on such massive human rights violations. It costs far more to pick up the pieces after crisis that it does to prevent it. Excellencies, today Lithuania remains committed to the implementation of responsibility to protect and calls on all UN member states to support and uphold this important political commitment. We all must do what we can do to protect civilian populations from the threat of mass atrocity crimes. Thank you very much.
Well, it took us a while, but we got there in the end. We battled with the gremlins inside the Zoom system, and we managed to get the video out there. It's now my tremendous honor to call on Mr. Ivan Kiencek, the Assistant Minister for the European Union and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Justice. And of course, His Excellency is also the R2P focal point for Croatia. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. It is my great honor as a Croatian national focal point for R2P to participate in this ministerial meeting and make a statement on this extremely important topic for Croatia. First of all, I would like to emphasize the importance of the item on R2P being re-included on the agenda of the UN General Assembly. Croatia was one of the countries that requested the inclusion of this item on the agenda, and we noticed that there has been a significant increase in support this year. We believe that we should take advantage of this increased wave of support and initiate the adoption of a resolution that would permanently put the R2P item on the agenda of the UN General Assembly. We hope for strong support for this idea. This year is marked by numerous anniversaries, 75 years since the end of World War II and the establishment of the UN, among many. This year, we also celebrate 15 years since the adoption of the principle of the R2P. In these 15 years, a lot has been done to promote the R2P concept and put a lot of effort into prevention of the commission of most serious crimes. I will use this opportunity to acknowledge great work that has been done by Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the responsibility to protect, Mrs. Karen Smith, but also by her predecessors, Mr. Ivan Šimonović, Mrs. Jennifer Welsh, and Mr. Edward Luck. Of course, special acknowledgement goes to the work of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. Indeed, a lot has been done, but the work is not finished. In this regard, we welcome the recent adoption of the UN Human Rights Committee resolution on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of R2P. This is the first Human Rights Committee resolution entirely on the R2P. This year is unfortunately also marked by the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus pandemic, which has brought the world to an unprecedented situation. Although the world is facing the fight against this pandemic and most of our efforts are directed towards that invisible enemy, we must be aware that in this situation, the risks of conflicts and hence of atrocity crimes also increase, as acknowledged in the recently adopted Omnibus resolution on COVID-19, and that we should therefore jointly act to mitigate them. I am proud to point out that during its presidency of the Council of the European Union in the first half of this year, when the pandemic was at its peak, Croatia participated in the organization of the marking of the EU Day Against Impunity for Genocide, Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes. Marking that was virtual but took place even in such difficult conditions and reminded us that the fight against impunity must not stop. The same thing must apply to promotion of R2P concept. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to call on all those countries that have not yet done so to appoint their national R2P focal points and to ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC. We must not forget that the primary responsibility to protect human lives, as well as to prosecute the perpetrators of most serious crimes and to prevent them from happening in first place, lies on the states themselves. Let us use this concept to improve our actions individually as states and collectively as part of the UN family, and to make this world a more peaceful and secure place. Thank you.
I thank you, the esteemed representative of Croatia, and I now call on the Honorable Denise Natale, Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations of the United States of America.
Good morning, thank you. I'd like to thank Costa Rica, Denmark, Qatar, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for holding this important discussion today and for keeping atrocity prevention on the international agenda. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the 1995 Srebrenica genocide and the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp. These are just two of the mass atrocities that have shocked the world's conscience over the last century. Tragically, there are many, many more. This year also marks the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, as well as the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the World Summit outcome. We are reminded of the enormous responsibility we have to anticipate and to prevent large-scale and deliberate attacks against civilians. Now we face a new challenge, a global pandemic that is turning attention and resources toward crisis response, leaving space for violent extremists and authoritarian leading governments to commit human rights violations and abuses with impunity. The impact of the pandemic in fragile states has the potential to exacerbate pre-existing atrocity risks in some places, including scapegoating members of ethnic and religious minority groups and violence against women and girls. The United States' commitment to atrocity prevention is reflected in the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocity Prevention Act, which was signed into law by President Trump in 2018. Since then, the Trump administration has taken concrete actions to build the United States government's capacity to conduct atrocity early warning, to prevent civilians at risk, and to hold those responsible for atrocities accountable. We are putting words into action, and we are focusing on prevention, protection, and prosecution. This effort also prioritizes information sharing, multilateral coordination, using data analytics to identify perpetrators, victims, where atrocities are occurring, and measuring the impact of our collective interventions. The international community needs to pursue more timely and effective multilateral coordination to prevent future atrocities. This begins with efforts such as this high-level ministerial today. The United Nations has a critical role to play. It must ensure that atrocity prevention remains at the forefront of international discussions on peace and security and take joint and timely action. The UN must bring to members' attention countries of concern, such as Venezuela, where the UN fact-finding mission found reasonable grounds to believe the Maduro regime is responsible for crimes against humanity. To further strengthen the United Nations efforts, the United States recommends that the UN fill the vacant special advisor on the prevention of genocide position as soon as possible and reaffirm its commitment to the Human Rights Upfront initiative. Security Council members should use their participation in that body to discuss countries of concern, including inviting members of affected groups, especially women, to speak directly to Council members. I look forward to hearing from the member states on the challenges and opportunities to strengthen action against atrocities. The United States will continue to act as a global leader in our efforts to prevent, mitigate, and respond to mass atrocities globally. Thank you.
We thank the esteemed representative of the United States for her comments, and I now call on His Excellency Mr. Stefano Sannino, Deputy Secretary General, Economic and Global Issues at the European External Action Service, another one of our speakers today who is also the R2P focal point for the European Union.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thanks to the organizer for gathering this quite impressive set of speakers. And it is true that it is an important occasion as we need to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the responsibility to protect. And from that point of view, it's now 15 years that the United Nations member states unanimously committed to protect the population from atrocity and crimes at the UN World Summit in 2005. Responsibility to protect is argue that while states or governments have the primary responsibility for protecting their own people from mass atrocity crimes, the international community has also shared responsibility to prevent and protect people from the most heinous atrocity crimes: genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. And today, when we look around the world, from Syria to Yemen, from the Central African Republic to North Korea, we are confronted with millions of ordinary people who fear for the security of their life every day. The grim reality of today's ongoing crisis is also a very stark reminder of the need to redouble efforts to effectively implement the responsibility to protect. And this is why it is so important, R2P is, by way of example, a standing item every General Assembly session. And this is also why we are very much welcomed with the recent Human Rights Council resolution on responsibility to protect at the 44th session, the first thematic resolution on R2P. Over and above its sudden and massive health, economic and social impact, COVID-19 has acted as a great accelerator of geopolitical trends and challenges. And in line with our broader ambition to build back better towards a green, digital and resilient global recovery, we must also develop a comprehensive strategic response to the wider geopolitical trends and challenges shaping the world today. And this includes the prevention of mass atrocity. As the UN Secretary General rightly points out in his latest report on responsibility to protect, effective atrocity prevention requires us to take holistic action, including by strengthening gender equality, and this is something that has been stressed by many of the speakers before me, as part of the upstream atrocity prevention, and by promoting women's participation as a key part of fulfilling their responsibility to protect populations against atrocity crimes. There is no doubt that advancing transitional justice can contribute to the prevention of mass atrocity and promote peace and security, in particular to conflict prevention, sustainable peace, and transitions in general. In this regard, I welcome the efforts undertaken by Belgium, among others, to put transitional justice on the Security Council agenda this year. Over the past 15 years, the responsibility to protect has served as a powerful reminder that we cannot just be bystanders when the most serious crimes are being committed before our eyes. That is why the European Union and the EU member states, working together with the group of the Friends of Responsibility to Protect, both in Geneva and in New York, will continue striving to enable effective and operational action on R2P at the UN, not least by supporting the French-Mexican initiative on veto restraint where a mass atrocity has been ascertained. The EU, with the support of the member states, will continue to use conflict analysis and the EU conflict early warning system to identify R2P issues and work for early action. We will also continue to support the important role of the UN Special Advisor on responsibility to protect. We live in a world challenged by interconnected and compounding dangers posed by economic turmoil, social economic inequality, gender inequality, the impacts of climate change and pandemics, all of which can contribute to increasing the possibility and the severity of violent conflicts and human suffering. We need to be vigilant, to remain vigilant, and to do all we can to prevent that conflicts driven by these factors result in mass atrocities. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the representative of the European Union, and it is now my honor to call on Her Excellency, Ms. Lina Lind, Ambassador at Large for Human Rights from Estonia.
Thank you. And first of all, many thanks to Costa Rica, Denmark, and Qatar, and most certainly to the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing today's meeting. Estonia stands firmly behind the principle of responsibility to protect and the inclusion of R2P as a formal topic of discussion at the General Assembly. We welcome the latest report of the Secretary General on R2P from July, focusing on gendered aspects of mass atrocity crimes. We agree that advancing gender equality and women's equal and meaningful participation is fundamental. The current pandemic leaves many countries and communities in an increasingly fragile state, possibly fueling conflicts. As part of building back better, ensuring secure and more wide use of ICTs is vital. Estonia, together with Singapore, recently launched a global declaration on the digital response to COVID-19 that puts forward the prospect that we will emerge from the crisis stronger and better equipped by using innovative digital solutions and working together as a global community. The Security Council plays a vital role in enacting the R2P. At the same time, as an elected member, we acknowledge that the Council continues to fail to live up to the standard of providing security to all people. The Council has been in deadlock in many situations where accountability is urgently needed, including in Syria and also Myanmar. In order to more effectively protect populations everywhere, we need to increase support to initiatives that aim to deter the use of veto, especially in cases of atrocity crimes. Prevention and prosecution of atrocity crimes is also clearly linked to the mandate of the International Criminal Court that Estonia fully. Furthermore, accountability mechanisms such as the IIIM, the Myanmar mechanism, and other commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions play a central role in collecting evidence and uncovering crimes. The work of the mechanisms need to be taken into account also by the Security Council. We further commend national initiatives such as the recent announcement by the Dutch government to hold the Syrian regime accountable for gross human rights violations under the Convention Against Torture. Finally, we point to the blatant disregard of human rights in many parts of the world. In terms of early warning and prevention, Estonia sees that the situation of human rights in Belarus requires close attention of the international community and the scrutiny of UN bodies and mechanisms. Estonia joins the Special Rapporteur on Belarus in recalling that it is the responsibility of the Belarusian state to prevent, investigate, and punish the crimes related to the brutal repression. We, individually and collectively, need to make sure that no perpetrator would be confident that they would not be prosecuted because of prevailing lawlessness and impunity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Estonia, and it's now my honor to call on Ms. Hika Tila, Director for Civilian Crisis Prevention and Stabilization of Germany.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is a big honor to take the floor for Germany today on behalf of our minister, who can unfortunately not take part due to other obligations, but he sends greetings to all the colleagues. 15 years after its inception, the concept of R2P has faced many and diverse challenges, yet it remains a crucial concept underpinning strong UN principles. We understand R2P against the backdrop of international engagement on stabilization, focusing responsibility of the international community to support states in their efforts to protect their population. In the framework of the German engagement, we focus on the necessary bridge between human rights protection and conflict prevention. Respect for human rights creates inclusive, stable states and prevents conflicts. Women's rights and gender engagement are pivotal to our approach. As the annual report of the Secretary General prioritizing prevention and strengthening response, women and the responsibility to protect underlines, strong efforts remain to be taken to strengthen the focus of R2P on women. We believe that it is paramount for the concept of R2P to concentrate on the role of women in fragile contexts. It is a concept that promotes the protection of all groups of society, and it tangibly encapsulates the values of the United Nations and the multilateral system. Germany puts the issue of strengthening women's roles as peace builders in fragile contexts, as well as the fight against sexual and gender-based violence, at the heart of our UN Security Council membership, not least by tabling Resolution 2467 in 2019. Germany's emphasis on this role of women is also
Sorry, Ambassador, I think you've flipped your microphone onto mute there. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. Germany puts the issue of strengthening women's roles as peace builders in fragile contexts, as well as the fight against sexual and gender-based violence at the heart of our United Nations Security Council memberships, not least by tabling Resolution 2467 in 2019. Our emphasis on this role of women is also reflected in our engagement in peace operations. Germany currently deploys 154 civilian experts to the UN, the OSCE, NATO, and other operations. Approximately 40% of them are women, and we strive to increase this ratio further. As underlined by our minister during the high-level open debate on conflict-related sexual violence last July, progress on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda remains painfully slow. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbates current crises and intensifies hardships of groups affected by multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and atrocities in fragile contexts. The pandemic also evokes setbacks like a substantial increase of gender-based violence in fragile contexts. This calls for our joint efforts to improve the situation of women in conflict. We are convinced that this meeting today helps us to underline the positive impact the concept of R2P has in crisis, conflicts, and fragile contexts in general. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Germany for her comments there. It's very strong comments, and it's now my honor to call on Her Excellency Ms. Maria Leto, Ambassador and Senior Expert, and also R2P focal point for Finland.
I wish to thank the Global Center and the co-hosts for this timely event, which allows us to commemorate at the same time the 75th anniversary of the World Organization and the 15th anniversary of the unanimous endorsement of the principle of responsibility to protect. In 2005, the member states of the UN united in a solemn commitment to prevent and respond to the most serious international crimes. This commitment has not lost anything of its actuality or relevance. Not only are widespread atrocities reported from many ongoing conflicts, but there are also recent developments attesting of a renewed political will to promote justice and accountability. Much has been done, furthermore, to translate the R2P principle into concrete action and to better understand the risk factors that may lead to atrocity crimes. Finland sees prevention as a critical part of the implementation of the principle. The tools for prevention include support to universal human rights, transparency, and inclusion, which are essential to strengthening the resilience of societies to conflicts. Peaceful and inclusive societies are best equipped to prevent atrocity crimes. In this regard, I would also like to highlight our long-standing commitment to promoting the rights and status of women and girls and supporting gender equality. And as I don't have much time, I will only point out that COVID-19 pandemic risks to have devastating effects on gender equality. According to the Secretary General's recent policy brief, the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women and girls is visible in every sphere, from health to the economy, security to social protection. Finland strongly supports the pledge to build back better after the pandemic. This includes pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals and decreasing social and economic inequalities, which must include ensuring women's equal representation and taking measures to achieve greater equality, opportunities, and social protection. Similarly, We support the call to embrace multilateralism, defend global norms and standards, and uphold international law. The global pandemic has only made it clearer that we need international cooperation. In the spirit of the responsibility to protect, let me add that standing up for the inalienable human rights of every person does not amount to interference in the internal affairs of a state. To conclude, I thank again for this opportunity to speak and would like to express our support to the valuable work done by the special representatives of the Secretary General for R2P and the prevention of genocide. We underline the importance of both functions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Leto, for your kind words, and thank you also for hosting us all, the members of the Global Network of R2P Focal Points in Helsinki a few years ago. It's now my honor to call on another friend, Her Excellency Ms. Blanka Jamnešek, the Ambassador from the Department for Human Rights, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the co-chairs for convening this important meeting, and I also express my deep appreciation for the work of the Global Center for R2P, the colleagues in the R2P focal points, both special advisors of the Secretary General, and of course, all the group of friends in New York and Geneva. As we observe the 75th anniversary of the UN, as well as the 15th years of the R2P principle, we have to admit the heightened relevance of both. Global problems, poverty, significant climate change, health and other emergencies, massive numbers of people displaced as a result of persecution, armed conflict, and mass atrocities, all call for more and better multilateral cooperation and greater action by promoting a human rights-based approach in all situations. Just as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights remains relevant despite a failure to prevent continuous abuses of human rights in so many places, so too does the R2P principle continue to be of fundamental importance. Slovenia has served as a co-facilitator on this topic in negotiations for the World Summit document in 2005 and has always been supportive of this principle. What is critically necessary is for R2P to continue to evolve with ever more effective application in real-world situations and preventing processes that lead to mass atrocities. Slovenia wishes to contribute to peace, security, and stability in the world that respects human rights and the rule of law. We support initiatives calling for the permanent members of the UN Security Council to refrain from using the veto when responding to situations where populations are at risk of mass atrocities. Of course, the call for global ceasefire should be implemented. As a future EU presidency in 2021, Slovenia intends to continue focusing on the concept of R2P as agreed in the recent EU recommendations on promoting and operationalizing the R2P by the EU and EU member states. Our objective is to contribute to the visibility, development, and implementation of this principle, which still needs recognition in some parts of the world. In our approach in combating COVID-19, we must remain aware that certain circumstances may additionally trigger risk factors for mass atrocities. This should be prevented. We also call the need to combat violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, which is unfortunately on the rise in this very crisis. The importance of humanitarian principles and the protection of humanitarian and medical workers should always be respected. Also, ensuring access to safe drinking water, protection of water resources and water infrastructure are vital elements in protecting populations in fragile situations, armed conflicts, or humanitarian crises, contributing to long-term prevention of mass atrocities. Slovenia pays special attention addressing water, peace, and security nexus. Our response measures in emergencies should take into account the needs of those that are most at risk of discrimination, stigmatization, xenophobia, and racism in line with the Global 2030 Agenda principle of leaving no one behind. We should create and build resilience. Slovenia will continue its endeavors to encourage more countries to support the prevention of processes that could lead to mass atrocities and to implement the R2P principle effectively. We continue to believe that prevention and adequate human rights-based response to situations where populations are under threat are of utmost importance. We need to uphold human rights. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. I just should point out that we are officially over time now, but we still have a large number of states who have requested to speak. In fact, an unprecedented number of states who have requested to speak. So we will try to get through all of them as long as people stick around. It's now my honor to call on Ms. Annika Ben David, Ambassador at Large for Human Rights, Democracy and the Rule of Law from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams and the Global Center, dear co-hosts and participants of this important and timely meeting. Sweden continues to be firmly committed to the responsibility to protect. And as we all know, we find ourselves in unprecedented times. Given the current range and intensity of crises around the world, many feel compelled to say that R2P has failed. But at the same time, important advances in the development of the principle and in the design of practical measures for its full implementation provide a more optimistic picture. Identifying the steps, the next steps in the implementation of responsibility to protect requires, we believe, taking both factors into account. While the Security Council is not able to act in many situations relating to international accountability, the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council play crucial roles in responding to atrocity crimes. This is demonstrated by the establishment of the IIIM, the International Impartial and Independent Mechanisms for Crimes Committed in Syria, and the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. And as my Danish colleague said, these successes are a direct result of concerted efforts by member states committed to holding perpetrators to account for their actions. Ensuring accountability remains one of the most effective ways to prevent the recurrence of mass atrocity crimes. Now, in times of the global COVID-19 pandemic, Sweden's foreign policy initiative Drive for Democracy that mobilizes our entire foreign service continues with full force and is even more relevant today. We must make sure that measures that aim at mitigating the virus do not lead to human rights being violated, democracy further eroding, and the rule of law being undermined. We are concerned of negative effects of measures to combat COVID-19 on civil society and human rights defenders, among other things. It cannot be emphasized enough that emergency measures or restrictions must be strictly in line with international law. We must make sure that our standards and norms will not have shifted in the aftermath of this pandemic. Sweden will continue to do our part in being a strong voice and an actor for the strengthening and promotion of democracy around the world. We have stepped up our efforts to protect democracy and its defenders. We will provide support wherever democracy can grow and express criticism when it's eroded. We believe that institution building and capacity development in general is an important part of building a more just and democratic society. Therefore, our support to democratic political institutions and processes continue. Strong institutions usually lead to better adherence to the rule of law. On the financial side, Sweden is a large donor of core support to the WHO, the UN funds and programs, and the development banks, which enable these actors to take early action as needs arise. With core support from Sweden and others, the UNDP has been able to rapidly support governments in their response, building on its long experience, among others in supporting the strengthening of institutions, upholding human rights and the rule of law, and addressing gender inequalities. In conclusion, Sweden will continue to stand up for human rights, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, democracy and the principles of the rule of law in times of crises and beyond. Sweden is also working hard to ensure a gender perspective in the global response. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those comments. And it's now my honor to call on Ms. Clementine Muker, Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Rwanda.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Kigali, Rwanda. It is a great pleasure to take part in this ministerial meeting on the responsibility to protect as we celebrate the 15 years anniversary of responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. When the Charter of the United Nations was adopted 75 years ago, our predecessors joined hands to save future generations from the scourge of war. Yet, 26 years ago, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda
I'm sorry, Ambassador, if you could just hold for 1 second. We seem to have an audio problem. Maybe try switching onto mute and then switching off mute again. Should we try that? I'm presuming nobody else can hear either. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Let me try to, our staff will be in contact with you. Let me try to go to somebody else and we will come back to you for that statement. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but I'm now going to call on Ms. Gwyn Kutz, Director General of the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program and the R2P focal point for Canada.
Thank you, Simon, and I'd like to thank Denmark, Costa Rica, and Qatar, and of course the Global Center for organizing today's session. And as Canada's national focal point for R2P, it's a pleasure to see so many of my international colleagues participating today, together with ministers. As we face the unprecedented global health crisis caused by COVID-19, a focus on human rights must be at the cornerstone of our collective response. Unfortunately, COVID-19 is being exploited to undermine human rights, particularly those of marginalized populations. The pandemic is also exacerbating existing inequalities, particularly for women and girls, heightening tensions between communities, and derailing peace processes and reconciliation efforts. All of these factors contribute to the risk of atrocity crimes, and we must redouble our efforts to both understand these risks and to take action to prioritize prevention. Preventing mass atrocities has long been a Canadian priority. After the failures of the international community to prevent genocide and atrocity crimes in Rwanda and Bosnia-Herzegovina, my government established the International Commission on Intervention in State Sovereignty. In 2001, the Commission issued a groundbreaking report elaborating on the responsibility to protect principles. Over the past 15 years, R2P has been endorsed by the General Assembly in 2005, reaffirmed in resolutions of the General Assembly and Security Council, and most recently commemorated in a Human Rights Council resolution. But as we welcome these developments to advance the principles of R2P at the UN, we must also be very clear-eyed in our assessment of the past 15 years. Progress in advancing R2P has not been matched by political will and resources where it matters most, in situations where populations are at risk of being killed simply for who they are. The Security Council is too often deadlocked, crippled by the use or by the threat of use of the veto by its permanent members. And the UN continues to struggle to link early warning of atrocity crimes with early action. This was witnessed most recently in Myanmar, where the UN not only missed clear warning signs, but also did not sufficiently gather, share, and act upon information and analysis that showed the escalating risk of atrocities against the Rohingya. Reviews of the UN's past responses to genocide and atrocity crimes in Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Sri Lanka came to similar conclusions. Looking forward, we worry that a review of the UNSC's response to the conflict in Syria would yield similar results, as resolutions regarding humanitarian access and accountability for chemical weapons use continue to be vetoed. The Secretary General's call to action on human rights, which Canada welcomes, provides us with an opportunity to address this long-standing gap. The UN must seize this opportunity by prioritizing and mainstreaming atrocity prevention within strategic planning and decision-making processes. Simply put, more must be done to ensure that human rights and atrocity prevention are at the center of the UN's work. We urge the Secretary General to put in place an analytical unit which would be charged with gathering and sharing information and analysis that indicates escalating risks of atrocities, and Canada stands ready to support these efforts. We must also continue to pursue accountability for perpetrators of mass atrocities, which will help to contribute directly to prevention. Since 2016, UN bodies have created quasi-prosecutorial entities in Iraq, Myanmar, and Syria to collect and store evidence relating to atrocity crimes and to support national and international investigations and prosecutions. Canada has provided support to all three of these innovations in global justice. We also, of course, strongly support the International Criminal Court, which is essential for helping to prevent the atrocity crimes. Canada also applauds the Gambia's efforts to advance accountability for atrocity crimes against the Rohingya by launching proceedings against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice. Earlier this month, Canada, in collaboration with the Kingdom of the Netherlands, announced our intention to intervene in the case, paying special attention to crimes related to sexual and gender-based violence. We consider it our obligation to support these efforts, which are of concern to all of humanity. 15 years ago, the world made a solemn commitment to uphold the responsibility to protect. Now, more than ever, we must work together to turn that commitment into a reality. Canada will continue to be a partner and a friend in advancing and upholding this important principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we are going to try to go back to our friends in Kigali. But before we do that, we just need a couple more minutes. So it's now my honor to call on His Excellency, Mr. Korkut Gunyen, Director General for Multilateral Political Affairs from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, dear participants. We thank all those who took the initiative to hold this meeting. As already emphasized by many speakers before me, 15 years ago, our heads of state and government have expressed their commitment to the principle of responsibility to protect from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Responsibility to protect begins at home and extends abroad. The essence is to uphold the fundamental commitment to member states to protect their populations from atrocity crimes and to assist each other in accordance with the UN Charter and international law when national authorities manifestly fail in their protection responsibilities. Contrary to some criticism, this principle does not allow any state or group of states to take unilateral coercive action. We strongly believe that responsibility to protect is our moral duty as well as collective commitment. Taking this opportunity, I would like to draw your attention to the situation in Syria as a case in point, which has a direct impact on my country. In Syria, since the war began in 2011, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Nearly 13 million people have been displaced, including 5.6 million Syrian refugees. An estimated 12 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance. The regime in Damascus, with total disregard for its responsibility to protect its own people, had itself committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including ending attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, have also been manifestly disregarded. Turkey shoulders the heaviest burden of the ongoing refugee crisis as a result of the conflict by sheltering more than 3.6 million Syrians in her territory. We will continue to provide basic services such as healthcare, education, and access to labor markets to Syrians under temporary protection, even in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. We will continue to extend our assistance to all the people seeking our protection in line with our international responsibilities. In the meantime, our efforts to provide the necessary conditions for the voluntary return of Syrians to their country continue. Until now, 420,000 Syrians have returned to their homes in the areas which have been cleared from terrorist groups. Before I conclude, let me briefly respond to a point made by the Foreign Minister of Armenia. The crime of genocide is a strictly described legal concept, and politicization of history benefits no one. We rather advise reaching a shared narrative that will be based on a just and objective memory. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank the representative of Turkey for his comments. We are now going to try to go back to our friends in Kigali and see if we can iron out some of the Zoom gremlins there in the audio. Let's try. No, we seem to still be having an audio problem. We'll be in touch. Again, the staff will be in touch. And in the meantime, I'm going to go now to His Excellency, Mr. Gerard Steegs, Director of Multilateral Organizations and Human Rights Department from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the R2P focal point for the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Simon. Excellencies, as others did before me, I would like to thank Qatar, Denmark, and Costa Rica for making possible this event in these strange circumstances online, together with the Global Center, of course. This event to mark 15 years of responsibility to protect, among other things. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is and continues to be a staunch supporter of R2P, and we warmly welcome the organization of this ministerial event. Unfortunately, my Minister of Foreign Affairs Blok, is traveling, and thus you are stuck with my humble presence in this lofty company. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is crucial to reiterate our joint commitment to R2P, to the prevention of mass atrocities, and discuss strategies to better protect populations. The challenges are evolving, and it is paramount that we adapt our instruments to match the increased challenges of mass atrocities. In our view, we must strengthen our collective efforts at all levels, including at the foundation. Structural inequalities, exclusion, and human rights violations are often root causes of violent conflict and mass atrocities. COVID-19 has laid bare underlying grievances and exacerbated existing inequalities. For the Netherlands, this implies 3 priorities to strengthen the UN. First, the best way for states to prevent human rights violations and violent conflict is to adopt a human rights-based approach in the way we govern. We believe that sustainable development and the prevention of mass atrocities requires full respect for binding international human rights norms. The enhanced human rights role of the UN resident coordinator and the commitment of the UN country team to human rights-based approaches should facilitate closer cooperation between states and the UN's human rights committees and special procedures. Second, a more effective cooperation between the 3 pillars of the UN is critical for early warning and action in case patterns of human abuse and instability occur. The Human Rights Council and the High Commission of Human Rights can perform the critical role of relay between the UN headquarters and country presence in global conflict prevention architecture. Thirdly, the paramount importance of sustained political and financial support to the United Nations and its human rights mechanisms, and also those that are outside the United Nations. Alongside its direct and devastating effects, COVID-19 has brought a global increase in hunger, unemployment, and instability. We know that these factors are often at the root of violent conflict and mass atrocities. We therefore believe that any effective COVID-19 response should protect an inclusive and diverse civil space and human rights defenders' advocacy for rights of those persons who are most marginalized and vulnerable. The rights to freedom of speech and access to information should be upheld, and government measures should not be extended and used incorrectly to silence dissidents, be it online or offline. The Netherlands welcomes collective action based on universal human rights norms. Only then it will be possible to improve the resilience and safety of societies to build back better and prevent future mass atrocities and continue to maintain our responsibility to protect. Thank you very much.
I thank very much my friend and the representative of the Netherlands, and we are still trying to sort out the problems in Kigali, but in the meantime, I'm going to now go to His Excellency Ricardo Bocalandro, Director of International Organization, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship of Argentina.
Thank you very much. We'd like to thank Qatar, Costa Rica, and Denmark for organizing this 12th ministerial meeting, and also congratulate the work of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. The UN is celebrating 25 years. We are also marking 15 years since the adoption of the principle of responsibility to protect. These commemorations take place in the context of uncertainty since the world is facing an appalling global pandemic. Even if COVID-19 cannot cause mass atrocities in town, it has increased stigma, xenophobia, racism, and discrimination, deepening divisions within communities and exacerbating inequalities that placed already vulnerable and marginalized communities at a greater risk. It is, however, a unique opportunity to reinforce our commitment and to emerge stronger and better equipped. In terms of prevention of heinous crimes, much remains to be done. States have shared responsibilities. We are all committed to protecting our populations from atrocity crimes. Argentina would like to highlight the role of prevention as the most significant dimension of R2P. The international community has made progress through national mechanisms to protect population, but it remains of utmost importance to have national systems with robust and effective early warning mechanisms. We should spare no effort to prevent atrocity crime. This is a matter of foreign policy, but also a domestic issue. States must show political will to enforce their commitment within their territories. However, we need the engagement of the international community. We need multilateralism and international cooperation. Even in the present uncertain context, for the first time, the Human Rights Council, in its 44th session, adopted a resolution on the subject of R2P. We supported the resolution since it consolidates the link between genocide prevention, R2P, and the broader human rights agenda. It highlights the primary role of states in preventing atrocity against their population, as well as the important contribution of the United Nations human rights system to initiatives aimed at addressing situations in which the gravest crimes might be committed. It is essential to support mechanisms for implementation of the principle, such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, its mechanisms and special procedures, and the Office of the Prevention of Genocide and the Responsibility to Protect. These mechanisms contribute to eradicate serious human rights violations, which can often be potential early indicators of mass atrocity. Due to our recent past and the related policies based on memory, truth, and justice, Argentina participates in and leads initiatives for the prevention of genocide and other massive atrocities, both at international and at regional levels. Argentina is one of the founding members of the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes, GAMAC. It's a member of Latin American Network for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities, an initiative jointly developed by Brazil with the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. And it is the only Latin American country which is a full member of the International Alliance for Holocaust Remembrance, IHRA. Argentina is also a member of the Group of Friends of the Responsibility to Protect in the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. We will remain supportive of all these efforts to raise awareness and to put in place consistent policy frameworks. Further equality within and among nations is needed to prevent the current context from leading to heinous crimes. We need solidarity and multilateralism as cross-cutting strategies to tackle the most urgent structural challenges to be able to build back better from this pandemic. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Argentina, and it is now my honor to call on Mr. Bert Fiersmessen, United Nations Director, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 15 years since the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect. Progress in strengthening our efforts to prevent and respond to atrocious crimes was made, though many challenges remain, including, as the Secretary General said in his opening remarks, in the context of the current pandemic. To make further progress, we need to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. This is crucial. Sustainable development cannot take root in the absence of peaceful societies. The strengthening of the rule of law, of institutions and access to justice as prescribed by SG 16 contributes to building the capacity of states to prevent atrocities. During Belgium's mandate in the Security Council, R2P has been a core feature of our daily work. As a non-permanent member of the Council since January, we've tried to incorporate mass atrocity prevention into the Security Council's agenda. As chair of the working group on children and armed conflict, we have obviously focused in particular on the plight of children. But we have also put specific emphasis on adequate care for women and girls. For the latest report by the Secretary General on R2P, published in July, highlighted clearly that there are links between the implementation of R2P, the advancement of gender equality, and the WPS agenda. The report examines how gender mainstreaming can not only contribute to a better understanding of the causes and dynamics of atrocity crimes, but also help states and other relevant actors to better meet their responsibility to protect. Furthermore, we have tried to incorporate and maintain specific language in relevant Security Council's mandates to support both national and international justice efforts, including, obviously, the International Criminal Court. Indeed, history has shown that the pursuit of accountability for the most serious crimes is crucial to ensure their non-recurrence, to allow reconciliation between various communities by recognizing the suffering of victims, and ultimately to achieving sustainable peace. This accountability, such accountability is also part of the wider issue of transitional justice, a topic on which Belgium organized a thematic debate in the Security Council as part of its presidency in February. We welcome the fact that the Secretariat continues to ensure that operational mechanisms allowing for joint analysis and concerted preventive action, such as the regional monthly reviews, remain used on a frequent basis. We believe that the Security Council should also be periodically and independently informed of situations that may lead to atrocity crimes. Hence, we have advocated for regular informal consultations or briefings with representatives of the Secretariat to address crisis at an early stage and strengthen the early warning capacity of the Council. We also believe it is important to involve as much as possible the UN machinery as a provider of concrete, measurable and cross-checked information, and so we're looking forward to the further development of such briefings organized by the Secretariats. To finish, I would like to thank and congratulate the special advisors on genocide prevention and R2P for the work they have already done during the past years. We are grateful to Mrs. Karen Smith for her dedicated and patient work to further the political and operational development of the principles of R2P. Our special thanks also go to Mr. Adama Dieng for his commitment and efforts to promote the prevention of genocide and other mass atrocities all over the world. We will work with his successor, once appointed, to help further this common agenda. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Belgium. I'm very cognizant of the time. It's been a very long meeting where we've got less than 5 speakers left. And it's now my pleasure to call on His Excellency, Mr. Valery Yotov, Director of UN and International Cooperation Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman. Let me join the previous speakers in congratulating the co-sponsors of this important event to commemorate the 15th anniversary of since the inception of the responsibility to protect. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, and dear colleagues, in 1945, George Orwell alerted the world about impending threats. These alerts, unfortunately, are still valid, adding the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic exposed a crisis of multilateralism and a deficit of solidarity. It challenged the UN's United Nations' fundamental purpose to save and protect. Prime defensive instincts of governments erupt into protectionism, escalating conflicts, disrupting economies and health systems, and hitting the most vulnerable population. R2P marks its 15th anniversary with unfulfilled promises. The responsibility to protect the civilian population from the suffering of starvation, displacement, segregation, poisoning, torture, abuse, and humiliation is off the priority list of regimes engaged in war and civilian conflict. A political culture of impunity still persists. Against this grim background, the support for the International Criminal Court is of paramount importance more than ever. Too few, unfortunately, adhere to the UN Secretary General appeal for a global ceasefire to protect the most vulnerable, and to the appeal that it is the responsibility of every country to protect the health and safety of its own people in periods of turmoil. Joining the Team Euro packages, Bulgaria dedicated over 1 million euros for emergency humanitarian aid. The support went to the most vulnerable in the Western Balkans, the EU Eastern Partnership countries, and to the people of Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, and the Palestinian refugees. We provided humanitarian assistance also to the Lebanese children in order to start the school year and not to miss their education. To help recovery, R2P should do better in all 3 UN pillars: peace and security, human rights, and importantly, development. We are of the view that sustainable development is the best prevention of conflicts. In our view, we should first support the UN as the moral leader of the modern world and the World Health Organization as the best coordinator for multilateral cooperation against the pandemic. Prevent abuse of access to humanitarian assistance and support peacekeepers. Second, move beyond atrocity alerts. R2P should not shy from exposing violations of international law and international humanitarian law concealed behind the protection of state interests. Third, rebuilding the world begins at home. We should build back better, starting from our own societies, eliminating hate speech and stigmatization. Fourth, the pandemic and climate change have a common solution. We cannot build back better on a devastated planet. Sustainable economies demand a more sincere climate action, being everyone's responsibility to protect. Fifth, persistence at all forums. For Bulgaria, this implies advocating R2P values during its current membership in the Human Rights Council and beyond. Finally, I'd wish to paraphrase 2 former opponents and Nobel Peace Prize winners: to build back better and prevent the olive branch from falling out of our hands, we should live beyond our own imagination. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Bulgaria, and I now call on His Excellency Mr. Mikhail Malginar, Permanent Representative of Slovakia to the United Nations in New York.
Thank you very much, dear Simon, and big thank you to all the conveners and organizers, our friends from Denmark, Costa Rica, Qatar, and of course, Global Center for getting us together. And we very much appreciate the discussion. We of course understand the challenges, and I try to be as brief and succinct as possible, just highlighting a few key points. Apologies from Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ivan Korchok, who unfortunately was tied up with other important commitments and who asked me to represent him. The current pandemic of COVID-19 has presented us, the whole international community, with new challenges that we have to tackle from various perspectives. Maybe at the first glance, it is not directly linked to the situation that we are facing in terms of R2P, as R2P is focused on the prevention of so-called atrocity crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. However, we believe the pandemic, with its immense negative effects on healthcare, economy, and many others, may even further exacerbate the suffering of populations experiencing conflicts and raise the risk of the commitment to atrocity crimes. So in that context, we believe it's important to address also that factor. In fact, vulnerable communities and populations have become even more susceptible to being victims of atrocities. Full respect of human rights can lower their risk, and this is something that in fact was clearly highlighted also yesterday during the general debate of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly by my president, by Her Excellency Madame Zuzana Čaputová. We really need to make sure that the human rights perspective is highly on our agenda, also in the COVID-19 pandemic context. States with the assistance and support of the international community, including the UN and regional organizations, must ensure that human rights are upheld in this challenge of a lifetime that we are facing. Against this background, we welcome the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, as well as the more topical, or if you will, specific UN guidance note on addressing and countering COVID-19 related hate speech, and his policy brief on COVID-19 and human rights. The issuance of these documents was critical and timely, and it helps us to build the post-pandemic response and recovery plans shaped by human rights. The R2P goes very much in line with the overall prevention agenda of the Secretary General. In order to sustain the required focus in the activities of the UN, we strongly support and appreciate the work of the Special Advisor on R2P, Ms. Karen Smith, who, as I understand, will be speaking just after me, and very much looking forward to hearing from her. In this regard, and in conclusion, before Karen and potentially a few others take the floor, I wish to point out the close link between R2P and other areas of interest for the UN, including the issue of security sector reform that Slovakia, together with South Africa, has been actively promoting as co-chairs of the relevant group of friends, because we believe that a reformed and well-functioning security sector will always be in a much better position to fulfill its tasks, protect the rights and safety of all persons, and act preventively should warning signs of atrocities arise. And there is an important, maybe joint work that the two groups of friends can undertake in that context, and we are more than ready and more than willing to look into this particular issue. Such institutions are also a condition for guaranteeing human rights. Thank you very much, Simon, and over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. As you mentioned there, we are down to the last few speakers. We only have France and then our good friend, the Special Advisor on R2P, who's going to give us some final comment. Before we do that, though, I do want to try one last time. We're going to try to go to Kigali and our friend Clementine. Hopefully we can make it work this time. Fingers crossed, everyone.
Yes. Good afternoon. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Thank you so much. And I apologize for the technical issues. So I'm conscious of the time. So thank you so much again. When the Charter of the United Nations was adopted 75 years ago, our predecessors joined hands to save the future generations from the scourge of war. Yet, 26 years ago, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda highlighted the inadequacy of the multilateral framework to uphold its commitments. Drawing lessons from the international community failures to adequately respond to mass atrocities, global leaders unanimously adopted the responsibility to protect principle to strengthen the international human rights framework and ensure the international community uphold its responsibility to protect population from the most heinous crimes. Distinguished participants,
As the world is facing a wide array of global threats, it is critical to ensure that protection and promotion of human rights remain a cornerstone of our long-term response to build back better. In this context, the Geneva-based UN human rights mechanisms and procedures have a key role to play in implementing the responsibility to protect by threatening atrocity, prevention, and response. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the adoption of the first thematic resolution on the responsibility to protect, adopted during the 44th regular session of the Human Rights Council. In addition, regional organizations have a role to play in addressing the risk and precursors of atrocity crimes. I would like to point out that the Continental Early Warning System, launched by the African Union as part of the African Peace and Security Architecture, has significantly contributed to mitigating large-scale political violence across the continent. Distinguished participants, as the COVID-19 has increased the risk factors which could lead to mass atrocity crimes, especially in fragile societies experience violence and repression, I would like to reaffirm Rwanda's commitment to join collective efforts to uphold our responsibility to protect populations. Rwanda will continue to contribute to UN peacekeeping operations with troops and police personnel when needed and requested, and I would like to take this opportunity to call upon troop contributors to UN peacekeeping missions to join the 50th signatory of the Kigali Principles. I would like to conclude by recalling that the primary responsibility for protecting people rests with states as a fundamental part of their national sovereignty. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your statement, and I'm so glad that we managed to make it happen. Thank you again, all the way from Kigali. Now the last state speaker is Mr. Adeline Royer, Deputy Head of the Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs Division of the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's a great honor to speak on behalf of my sister, Mr. Jean-Yves Le Drian, who could not attend this meeting today, unfortunately. First of all, I would like to thank you and to thank the organizers for this important discussion, which we very much appreciate. We are meeting today to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the principle of the responsibility to protect. As mentioned by many previous speakers, this event takes place in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which beyond its huge health and economic impact on societies, would also bear consequences of the dynamics of conflict. 15 years after its adoption by all the members of the UNGA, our priority must be to operationalize the political commitments on which the R2P is based and avoid repeating the theoretical and polarized debates we sometimes continue to have. In this regard, we suggest to focus on 4 areas. Firstly, the strengthening of our efforts on prevention through a comprehensive and coherent approach with the implementation of the Agenda 2030, the promotion of peacekeeping, the protection of civilians, and the promotion of human rights. Secondly, the French-Mexican initiative on the use of veto when mass atrocities are at stake. The veto at the UNSC is not a privilege, it implies duties and a responsibility conferred by the UN Charter. Our initiative aims at a voluntary and collective pledge by the 5 Security Council permanent members not to use the veto in case of mass atrocities in order to avoid a paralysis of the Security Council. This initiative is supported so far by 105 states. Thirdly, the mobilization of regional and sub-regional organizations. We must notably strengthen the partnership between the United Nations, the African Union, and the EU, as well as the links with sub-regional organizations such as the Economic Community of West African States. In this context, promoting the exchange of best practices would be very useful. Finally, the fight against impunity. We must strengthen the different tools and continue to call on all states to support and cooperate with fact-finding missions, commissions of inquiry, and instruments of international criminal justice. In this regard, let me underline the full support of France to the work of the International Criminal Court, which is being subject to unacceptable pressure and sanctions. As the only permanent and universal international criminal court, the ICC brings an answer to the need of justice felt by the victims and contributes to international peace and security. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much to the representative of France. And it's now my great honor to hand over to my dear friend, Dr. Karen Smith, the Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General on the responsibility to protect, for the last word.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon. And thank you to everyone who is still with us at the end of this marathon session. I'd also just like to again thank the co-chairs of the group of friends and of course the Global Center and Simon for facilitating this meeting, and to all the speakers who today have underscored the continued importance of the responsibility to protect. Now, anniversaries of course offer us opportunities for reflection, both on progress, challenges, but also failures. When we look back on 75 years of the United Nations existence, it's important that we recognize its significant contributions to peace and security and the promotion of human rights. And the adoption of the responsibility to protect in 2005 reinvigorated the urgency to put the people at the core of our work, when global leaders solemnly pledged to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. On this historic anniversary, however, it's even more important that we pause and ask ourselves to what extent this has been achieved. We can speak of success stories, but the simple fact is that we have not done enough. Highlighting instances of successful prevention is not enough for the Rohingya who cannot dare to go home for fear of being slaughtered, for the women of South Sudan whose daily lives are plagued with memories and fears of sexual violence, for the children of Syria who know no other life than one of death and fear. Our deficits relate not to a failure of the principle, but to a failure of implementation. And there are different views on the reasons for this. We must therefore redouble our efforts to engage in genuine dialogue, as we've done today, to find a way forward and strengthen multilateral action to protect populations. It's notable today that we heard from very few speakers from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And so more needs to be done to engage all states in both global conversations, but also at a regional level. As the UN Secretary General said today, greater investment in prevention and in building a culture of respect for human rights is critical to fulfill the aspirations of the responsibility to protect. And I was happy to hear this reflected in many of the comments today. At the domestic level, because this is of course where prevention starts, this means putting in place the measures to build strong, resilient, inclusive societies. It means developing systematic prevention strategies and enshrining these in national and regional action plans. It means addressing atrocity prevention in foreign relations, whether through trade, development, or conflict prevention. It means increasing efforts to end impunity by ratifying and implementing key international instruments, including the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. We also need civil society organizations to continue to hold all of us accountable. We need regional approaches to make prevention context-specific and effective. Perhaps most of all, we need responsible and visionary leaders to stand up for human life and human dignity and to speak out against hate speech and discrimination. Finally, I think it's clear that we need international cooperation to build back better and to protect vulnerable populations, so that we can not only live up to the aspirations of the founders of the UN, but also to the promises made to all people of the world in 2005. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thank the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor. Thank you, Karen, for those wonderful comments. It's been a long day, everybody. We've heard strong endorsement here today of human rights, of sustainable development, and of our responsibility to protect. And in that context, I'm truly reminded of the comments of my friend, Abubakar Tambadou, the former Minister of Justice of the Gambia. He was just named by Time magazine yesterday as one of the 100 most influential people of 2020. And when he was asked why the tiny Gambia had brought this historic case forward, and this very much goes to your comment just now, Karen, I think, he said, international law is not the exclusive preserve of the rich and powerful countries. You do not have to be a military power or an economic power to stand up for justice and to stand up for what is right. We are doing this in the name of humanity. So I think what we've heard here today should remind all of us that we need to do more to ensure that human rights, international law, and global responsibilities are upheld without exception and with consistency and with courage. I'd like to thank all of the ministers and all of the member states that participated in today's meeting and everyone that joined online to watch. I'd like to also thank Juliet Power, Jahan Pitawala, Sarah Ewing, and Christine Caldera, who did the behind the scenes tech magic and coordination for this event, even when things went wrong. We had more than 35 speakers on 5 continents and more than 200 participants online. So it was definitely the largest R2P ministerial meeting that we've ever had. Finally, I'd like to sincerely thank our 3 wonderful co-hosts, the foreign ministers of Costa Rica, of Denmark, and of Qatar for their leadership and for their support of these issues. I wish you all a very good day. If I had a gavel, I would bang it somewhere. I don't. So I will simply raise my pen in the air and wish you all the very best. Thank you. This meeting is closed.